in what is now the second biggest air tragedy in India.
Boeing Dreamliner in the air shortly before taking off at 1:30 p.m. local time.
The flight of Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner carried 242 people, including 230 passengers and 12 crew members.
242 people on board went down, striking the residential complex for doctors and triggering massive explosion.
Hello and welcome friends, Namaskar to Straight Bat, your weekly video blog where, as the title suggests, I comment with a straight bat. Life as a newsman is interesting, but it's also a life that often gives you wake-up calls. I was on Thursday, the 12th of June, at my news meeting, which is held around noon, telling the news team that puts together the 9 p.m. show on India Today, guys, don't you have any news? What kind of news rundown do we have today? Can't we get a big story? My colleagues told me that not much was happening in the world of news today. It was what they call a slow news day. How horribly wrong they were and I was. Just 2 hours later, a flight crashed just minutes after taking off from Ahmedabad airport. Air India Flight 171, the Air India Dreamliner, a wide-bodied aircraft, crashing into a medical hostel, and 200 people and more on the flight and several on the ground have died. Just think about it. 2 hours after we thought that it was a slow news day, tragedy takes over. But it took my mind to two instances that I want to speak to you about today, which in a way will tell you the story of life. The year was October 1988. I was a young trainee journalist, my first year in journalism. One day in October, reports came in that an Indian Airlines flight 113 on its final approach to Ahmedabad airport, the same Ahmedabad airport, had crashed. 133 of the 135 people on board died in that crash. I was asked to accompany the civil aviation reporter to Mumbai airport and speak to the grieving relatives. As it turned out, one of the relatives, or one of those who had died in that crash, was someone who lived in a building next to mine, and I knew his son. We played cricket together. That day, and this is pre-television, I was a print reporter. I found it very difficult to speak to grieving families. I didn't know what to say to them, what to say to my friend who had lost his father, or what to ask a grieving mother or sister. It was a day which I found extremely difficult to deal with. And I repeat, this was pre-camera, when now they just thrust cameras and mics into the faces of grieving relatives. And that day I told myself that there are lots of stories that I'm very excited to do as a journalist, but I don't want to cover a plane crash, because I just don't know what to ask a grieving relative. Maybe you have better questions that you could have asked. That was 1988. We're now in 2025, when there's this horrific tragedy that has befallen us, with several people passing away, including the former Chief Minister of Gujarat, Vijay Rupani. But it took my mind to something even more troubling. Just a couple of weeks ago, in the third week of May, just days before I was to turn 60, my wife, who's a member of Parliament of the Trinamool Congress, was traveling to Jammu and Kashmir They were going on a mission along with other MPs of that party to condole with the victims of Pakistan's cross-border shelling in places like Poonch and Rajouri. They were taking an afternoon flight. My wife was scheduled to originally go on an Air India flight. But eventually, because her colleagues who were coming from Kolkata landed a bit late, they shifted to an Indigo flight. Okay? I didn't even have time to say goodbye to her. And I just sent her a message, safe travels. I then went to office and it appeared just like another day. Suddenly someone came into the newsroom and told me, sir, there's a bit of a weather situation outside. There's an andhi going on outside and the weather could be one of your headlines for the evening. I said, okay, we'll look at that story. 15 minutes later, the same colleague came and said, sir, the story could be getting bigger. There's a flight which is on its way to Srinagar, which we are told has been caught in turbulent weather and its nose has blown off. I didn't put two and two together instantly. I suddenly, though, almost strangely enough, thought about flight to Srinagar. I asked my colleague, which airline? He said, Indigo Airlines, sir. My first reaction then was, holy shit. My wife, Sagrika Ghosh, had already sent a message to our family group, just landed after a horrendous flight and a miraculous escape. The picture was now getting clear. Sagrika had been on that Indigo flight where the nose blew off, where the pilot was suddenly found himself in a hailstorm, where apparently the Pakistani airspace which he wanted to enter wouldn't give him permission post Operation Sindoor, and therefore he chose to land in Srinagar. When I saw the visuals that my colleague was sending me of the flight shaking and what had happened inside, I realized that Sagrika and her colleagues, including the likes of Derek O'Brien and Nadeem-ul Haq and Mamta Thakur, had survived, as had the other passengers on the flight. Think about it. This was just 3 or 4 days before I turned 60. It was, in a way, a miracle, a gift that someone very close to me had survived this traumatic experience. We celebrated as a result my 60th birthday, but with the knowledge that it could have all gone so horribly wrong. And that, my friend, is life. The lines are very, very fine. Who knows what tomorrow brings? Just think about this Air India flight itself. Almost everyone has died. But when I'm presenting this blog, there is one survivor who's emerged unscathed. What was it that makes one person live when everyone else around him dies? Is there some force above us all who decides your time has come and yours has not? I'm told there was another passenger who arrived 10 minutes late and therefore could not board this Air India flight. These are the stories of life, my friend. And they should convince us, you and me, that live life in the moment. Think about your friends, about your relationships, about the better, positive things of life. Because if we get caught in a slough of negativism, we may well find ourselves one day on the wrong side of a terrible tragedy. And therefore, my thoughts and prayers today are with the families of the victims of this Air India crash. I would never want to cover this story because, as I told you, it's something that I find very difficult to reconcile, thrusting a mic into someone who's lost a relative. But every time something like this happens, it reminds me of the fragility of life. I will be flying tomorrow morning, and when I enter the flight, I will say a prayer. I'm not someone who goes to a temple, a church, or a mosque, or a place of worship. I've always believed God resides inside you. And what you can do for others is the only thing that, according to me, is true compassion that makes a difference to people's lives. The rest you leave to, as they say, Upar Wala. I have a Hindi song that I often croon to myself every now and then. जिंदगी एक सफर है सुहाना, यहाँ कल क्या हो किसने जाना. That, my friends, is the story of life. As I said, my thoughts and prayers today are with the families of those who've lost their near and dear ones, both in the air and on the ground, in this horrific air tragedy. Think about them, say a prayer for them. The power of prayer. That was the Straight Bat. Thanks for watching. Stay well, stay safe. Jai Hind. Namaskar.